Growing up in our small Connecticut town, I always knew I'd run Sullivan & Associates one day. Dad started the accounting firm in our garage back in 1987, and by the time I was old enough to understand what a balance sheet was, I was already helping him organize client files after school. Mom would joke that I had numbers in my blood, just like him. I spent my entire 20s building that company from the inside out. While my friends were out partying or traveling Europe, I was pulling all-nighters during tax season, learning every aspect of the business. I knew our clients' kids' names, remembered their anniversaries, and somehow always managed to find extra deductions that saved them thousands. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery downtown still sends me Christmas cards because I helped her navigate that messy divorce settlement 3 years ago. Dad used to brag about me at the local Chamber of Commerce meetings. "My Sarah's got a head for business," he'd say, puffing out his chest. "Smartest hire I ever made, even if she is family." Mom would beam whenever clients complimented my work, telling everyone how proud she was that I'd chosen to stay in Millbrook instead of chasing some corporate job in Manhattan. I wasn't just keeping the lights on either. Last year alone, I brought in 6 new commercial accounts, including that big contract with the Miller Construction Group. I redesigned our entire client management system, started our first social media presence, and even convinced Dad to finally upgrade from that ancient computer system he'd been using since the Clinton administration. So when Dad called me into his office on that gray Tuesday morning in March, asking me to sit down for an important family discussion, I figured we were finally going to make it official. Maybe draw up some succession papers, or at least talk about giving me a partnership stake. I'd been dropping hints for months about wanting more responsibility, more recognition for everything I'd accomplished. Mom was already sitting there when I walked in, wringing her hands the way she does when she's nervous. Dad cleared his throat and started talking about the future of the firm and making some big changes. I nodded along, expecting to hear my name any second. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were transfer documents, all signed and notarized. Every single share of Sullivan & Associates was being handed over to my younger brother Tommy. 24-year-old Tommy, who'd graduated from UConn just 2 years ago with a business degree he barely earned. Tommy, who'd spent exactly 18 months working at the firm, mostly answering phones and filing paperwork. Tommy, who still lived in Mom and Dad's basement and spent his weekends playing video games. "We think fresh blood is what the company needs," Dad said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Tommy's got new ideas, modern perspectives. He understands technology better than we do." I sat there staring at those papers, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. 12 years of my life, and they were handing it all to Tommy because he knew how to use Instagram and could fix Dad's computer when it froze up. "What about me?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom reached over and patted my hand. "Oh, honey, you'll always be part of the family business. You can keep doing what you're doing. Nothing really changes for you. Nothing changes. Except everything was changing. I wasn't going to be the boss. I wasn't going to make the big decisions. I was going to keep doing all the hard work while Tommy got the credit, the control, and the profits." I looked at both of them sitting there, waiting for me to congratulate Tommy or tell them how excited I was about this new direction. Instead, I stood up, walked out of that office, and never looked back. The first week after I quit felt like I was living in someone else's life. I'd wake up at 6:30 out of habit, reach for my phone to check emails, then remember I didn't have any emails to check anymore. No client calls to return, no deadlines to meet, no fires to put out. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I tried to stay busy. I deep cleaned every room, organized my closets, even painted the bathroom that awful mint green color I'd been putting off for months. But by noon each day, I'd find myself sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring out the window at nothing in particular. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, would wave at me from her garden, probably wondering why I was home all the time now. The hardest part was driving through downtown. Millbrook's Main Street is only 4 blocks long, so there's no avoiding Sullivan & Associates when you need to get groceries or pick up dry cleaning. Every time I passed that familiar storefront with its navy blue awning and gold lettering, my chest would tighten. I could see Tommy through the window sometimes, sitting at what used to be my desk, probably playing solitaire on the computer. Mom called a few times during those first couple weeks. Awkward conversations where she'd ask how I was adjusting and if I needed anything. She never directly mentioned the business, but I could hear the guilt in her voice. She'd tell me about Tommy's latest idea to redesign the website or how Dad was teaching him to use the new accounting software. Always positive, always upbeat, like she was trying to convince herself that everything was working out perfectly. "You know, honey, maybe this is a blessing in disguise," she said during one particularly painful phone call. "You can finally pursue your own dreams now. Maybe start that consulting business you used to talk about." I wanted to scream. The consulting business I used to talk about was something I'd mentioned once, years ago, when I was frustrated with a difficult client. It wasn't a real plan. My real plan had been Sullivan & Associates. My real dream had been carrying on Dad's legacy, building something meaningful in the town where I grew up. Dad never called. Not once. I'd see his truck around town occasionally, but he'd always seem to be looking the other way when we crossed paths. I wondered if he felt guilty, or if he was just relieved not to have to deal with the mess he'd created. Maybe it was easier for him to pretend I'd never existed at all. The worst part was running into people I knew. Millbrook's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and word travels fast. I'd be at the grocery store and someone would ask, "How's the family business going?" with genuine interest. I'd mumble something about taking some time off and change the subject as quickly as possible. Mrs. Patterson cornered me at the post office one afternoon, her face full of concern. "Sarah, dear, I heard Tommy's taken over the firm. Are you all right? You've always been the one who knew what you were doing over there." I smiled and told her I was fine. That change was good, that Tommy would do a great job. But inside, I was screaming, because Mrs. Patterson was right. I was the one who knew what I was doing. I was the one who'd built relationships with clients, who understood their needs, who could solve their problems. And now I was standing in the post office, pretending everything was wonderful while my little brother played businessman with my life's work. 3 months passed this way. 3 months of silence, of pretending I was okay, of watching from the sidelines as my family moved on without me. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter just to have somewhere to go during the day, something to care about. The dogs didn't judge me for being angry or hurt. They just wanted someone to throw a tennis ball and scratch behind their ears. That's where I was, giving bath time to a golden retriever named Murphy, when my phone rang with a call that would change everything. I almost didn't answer when I saw Dad's name on my phone. For 3 months, he'd managed to avoid me completely, and I'd gotten used to the silence. But something made me swipe to accept the call. Maybe curiosity, maybe some stupid hope that he was finally ready to apologize. "Sarah?" His voice was shaky, barely recognizable. "Sarah, I need to talk to you." "What's wrong?" The question came out automatically, years of being the problem solver kicking in despite everything. "We lost Miller Construction." The words came out in a rush, like he was afraid to say them slowly. The whole account, all of it. I stopped petting Murphy and sat down hard on the shelter's front steps. Miller Construction wasn't just any client. They were our biggest account, worth about $15,000 a month in bookkeeping and tax prep. More than that, though, they were connected to half the other businesses in town. Jack Miller had recommended us to at least 6 other clients over the years. "What happened?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Tommy," Dad's voice cracked. "Tommy was supposed to handle their quarterly review last week. He showed up late, didn't have the right paperwork, and got into some kind of argument with Jack about late fees. Jack called me personally to say they were done with us." I closed my eyes. Jack Miller was old school, the kind of guy who expected you to be early, prepared, and respectful. He'd been doing business with Dad since the early 90s, back when Miller Construction was just Jack and his pickup truck. I'd handled his account for the last 5 years, and he'd always been satisfied with my work. "There's more," Dad continued, and I could hear him crying now. Actually crying. Words getting around. "Jack's been talking to other business owners, telling them what happened. We've already lost Peterson's Hardware, and I think the Rodriguez family is going to pull their restaurant account too." Each name hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just clients to me. They were neighbors, people I'd grown up with, people who'd trusted me with their most important financial decisions. Mrs. Peterson had been my 3rd grade teacher, The Rodriguez family had catered my high school graduation party. Dad, I'm sorry this happened, but I don't understand why you're calling me. It was a lie. I knew exactly why he was calling. Because you're the only one who can fix this. The words came out desperate, pleading. Jack respects you. They all do. If you talk to them, explain that there was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I stood up, anger finally breaking through the shock. Dad, you handed the company over to Tommy. You made it very clear that he was the future, and I wasn't needed anymore. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is exactly what you chose. I know we made a mistake. But Sarah, please. The whole business is falling apart. We could lose everything. Everything. The business Dad had built from nothing. The legacy he'd worked 30 years to create. The same legacy he'd decided I wasn't worthy of inheriting just 3 months ago. Where's Tommy? I asked. Where's your brilliant new CEO with all his fresh ideas? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Dad spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. He's talking about maybe going back to school. Says business ownership is more stressful than he expected. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tommy was ready to bail at the first sign of real trouble, leaving Dad to clean up the mess. The golden boy who was supposed to revolutionize Sullivan and Associates was running away, just like he'd run away from every other responsibility in his life. Sarah, please, Dad begged. I know I hurt you. I know I made the wrong choice, but I'm asking you to help us. Not for me, not for Tommy, for all the clients who are going to suffer if we go under. That was the moment I realized something had fundamentally changed inside me. 3 months ago, that argument would have worked. I would have rushed in to save the day, to fix everyone else's problems while swallowing my own hurt. But sitting there on those shelter steps, with Murphy licking my hand and the sound of Dad's tears in my ear, I felt something I'd never felt before. Peace. Dad, I said quietly, where is your businessman son now? I hung up before he could answer. For the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could breathe. After I hung up on Dad, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text messages, voicemails, even a few missed calls from Mom. I turned it off and spent the rest of the afternoon at the shelter, losing myself in the simple task of cleaning kennels and refilling water bowls. The dogs didn't care about family drama or business failures. They just wanted someone to show up and take care of them. When I finally got home that evening, I had 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Most were from Dad, increasingly desperate as the hours passed. Please call me back. We need to talk. Sarah, I'm begging you. Mom's messages were gentler but just as persistent. Honey, your father is beside himself. Can we please work something out? The last message was from Tommy himself. Hey sis, maybe we should meet up and figure this out together. I stared at that text for a long time. Tommy, who hadn't said a word to me when I walked out 3 months ago, was suddenly ready to figure this out together now that things were falling apart. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the sun set behind the old oak tree in my yard. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was just tired of being everyone else's emergency contact. The next morning, Jack Miller called me directly. Not the business line, not Dad's cell phone. My personal number, which he'd gotten from the business card I'd given him years ago. Sarah, I heard what happened, he said without preamble. About your family's situation, I mean. I want you to know that what went down with your brother had nothing to do with you. I appreciate that, Mr. Miller. Jack, you've been handling my books for 5 years. I think we're past the formalities. He paused, and I could hear him taking a drag from one of his ever-present cigarettes. Listen, I've got a proposition for you. I know you're not with Sullivan and Associates anymore, but I still need an accountant. A good one. Would you be interested in taking me on as an independent client? My heart started beating faster. I'd have to get licensed as a solo practitioner. Set up my own systems. I figured as much. And I'm willing to wait while you get everything sorted out. Matter of fact, I've been talking to some of the other business owners around town. There's quite a few of us who'd rather work with you than deal with whatever's going on over at your dad's place. I gripped the phone tighter. How many is quite a few? Well, let's see. Me, obviously. The Petersons are interested. Maria Rodriguez called me yesterday, asking if I knew how to get in touch with you directly. And I think if you reached out to some of your other former clients, you'd be surprised how many would be willing to make a change. After Jack hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists. Clients who might be interested in switching, startup costs for my own practice, software I'd need, insurance requirements, office space options. For the first time in 3 months, I had a project that excited me. By noon, I'd made 5 phone calls and gotten 3 definite yeses and 2 maybes. Mrs. Peterson cried when I told her I was thinking about starting my own firm. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "I was so worried about having to train someone new on all our quirks." The calls from my family continued, but I let them go to voicemail. Dad's messages were getting more frantic. "Sarah, we're hemorrhaging clients. Please, just call me back." Mom tried a different approach. "Honey, I know you're upset, but family has to stick together during tough times. Family has to stick together." Where was that sentiment 3 months ago when they were handing my life's work over to Tommy? That evening, I drove to the Millbrook Public Library and checked out 3 books on starting a small business. I had a lot to learn, but for the first time since that awful day in Dad's office, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. The funny thing was, I wasn't even thinking about revenge or proving them wrong. I was thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's restaurant and how I'd helped her navigate the PPP loan process during COVID. I was thinking about Jack Miller's construction business and how we'd restructured his equipment financing to save him thousands in interest. I was thinking about all the relationships I'd built, all the trust I'd earned, all the expertise I'd developed over 12 years. They couldn't take that away from me. They'd given away the Sullivan and Associates name, but they hadn't given away Sarah Sullivan. And maybe, just maybe, that was going to be enough. Word travels fast in a town like Millbrook. By the end of the week, it seemed like everyone knew I was starting my own accounting practice. I'd run into people at the grocery store who'd congratulate me or ask when I'd be officially open for business. Mrs. Chen from next door brought over a casserole and told me she'd heard from her book club that half the town was ready to switch over to my new firm. I rented a small office space above Martinelli's Deli on Main Street. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms with big windows that looked out over the town square, but it felt right. Mr. Martinelli knocked $50 off the monthly rent when he heard what I was doing. "Your family's been doing my books for 8 years, he said, shaking my hand. Looking forward to keeping that relationship going. Setting up took 2 weeks. New computer, business license, liability insurance, all the boring but necessary stuff that makes a business legitimate. I registered as Sullivan Financial Services, keeping my name but making it clear this was something entirely new. The first day I unlocked my office door and turned on the lights. I stood there for a minute, just breathing it in. This was mine. Every decision, every client relationship, every success or failure would be on me. Meanwhile, things were getting worse for Sullivan and Associates. I heard through the grapevine that they'd lost 2 more clients and that Tommy had stopped showing up to work regularly. Dad was apparently trying to handle everything himself, but at 63, he'd gotten used to having help with the day-to-day operations. I was working late on a Thursday night, getting ready for my first official client meeting the next morning, when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my office. I looked up to see Mom standing in my doorway, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. "Your light was on," she said quietly. I hoped we could talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down slowly, taking in the fresh paint and new furniture. "It looks nice in here," she said. "Professional. Thank you." We sat in silence for a minute. Finally, Mom sighed and looked directly at me for the first time since she'd arrived. "We made a mistake," she said. "A terrible mistake. I don't know what we were thinking. You were thinking that Tommy deserved a chance, and I'd just go along with whatever you decided." She winced. "It wasn't like that. We thought you were so capable, so independent, that you'd be fine no matter what. And Tommy seemed to need the structure, the responsibility. So you gave him mine." "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. "And now he's talking about moving to Boston, maybe getting a job with one of his college friends. He says running a business is too much pressure. I wanted to feel vindicated. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for Dad, who was watching his life's work crumble. Sad for Mom, who was finally understanding the consequences of their choice. Even sad for Tommy, who'd been set up to fail at something he never really wanted in the first place. "Your father won't admit it, but he's been driving by your office every day," Mom continued. "He sees the lights on, sees how busy you are. I think he's finally realizing what he lost when you walked out." "It's not about what he lost, Mom. It's about what I found." She looked confused, so I continued. "For 12 years, I worked for Dad's approval. I stayed late, took on extra clients, solved every problem that came up, all because I wanted him to see that I was worthy of taking over someday. But I was never working for myself. I was working for his vision of what the business should be." I gestured around the office. "This is my vision. These are my clients, choosing to work with me because they trust me, not because I'm Bob Sullivan's daughter. For the first time in my adult life, I'm building something that's completely mine." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I know we hurt you. I know we can't undo what we did. But maybe there's a way we could work together again. Maybe you could merge your practice back with ours, and we could make you a full partner." I shook my head gently. "Mom, I love you, and I love Dad. But I'm not interested in being rescued or welcomed back. I don't need Sullivan and Associates anymore." She sat there for a long time, looking around my small but growing office. Finally, she stood up and walked to the door. "I'm proud of you," she said, not turning around. "I should have said that months ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of what you're building here." After she left, I stayed at my desk until almost midnight, putting the finishing touches on a presentation for Jack Miller's quarterly review. Tomorrow would mark exactly 4 months since I'd walked out of Dad's office. 4 months since my world had fallen apart, and then slowly, carefully, started to rebuild itself into something better. 6 months after walking out of that boardroom, I stood in my office on a Friday evening, looking at the framed business license on my wall. Sullivan Financial Services had 12 regular clients now, with 3 more scheduled to start next month. I'd hired Jenny Morrison, fresh out of college with an accounting degree, to help with data entry and basic bookkeeping. She reminded me of myself at that age, eager and hardworking, hungry to prove herself. The best part wasn't the money, though the business was already profitable enough for me to start thinking about expanding to the empty office next door. It wasn't even the satisfaction of being my own boss, though that felt incredible after years of waiting for someone else to recognize my worth. The best part was the respect. When Jack Miller called with a question about his quarterly taxes, he asked for my opinion and actually listened to my answer. When Mrs. Rodriguez needed advice about financing a second restaurant location, she trusted my judgment completely. These weren't people doing me a favor or throwing me a bone. They were choosing me because I was good at what I did. I still saw my parents around town occasionally. Dad looked older, more hunched over than I remembered. Mom would wave from across the street but never approached me again after that night in my office. I heard through the usual small-town channels that they'd brought in a consulting firm from Hartford to try to salvage what was left of Sullivan and Associates. Tommy had moved to Boston after all, landing some entry-level job at a marketing company. The local newspaper ran a feature story about new businesses in Millbrook, and Sullivan Financial Services got a nice write-up with a photo of me and Jenny in our office. "Local entrepreneur builds growing practice," read the headline. I kept a copy on my desk, not because I needed the validation anymore, but because it felt good to be recognized for what I'd accomplished, rather than who I was related to. One afternoon in late September, I was reviewing payroll reports for Peterson's Hardware when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Sarah, this is Tom Bradley from Bradley & Sons Landscaping. Got your number from Jack Miller. Wondering if you might be taking on new clients?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. When would you like to schedule a consultation?" Bradley & Sons was the biggest landscaping company in 3 counties. If I landed that account, I definitely need to expand into the neighboring office space. Maybe hire another full-time accountant. I'd already been thinking about offering payroll services and tax preparation for individuals, not just businesses. That evening, I stayed late to work on a business plan for the next year. Growth projections, staffing needs, potential service expansions. Real planning, not just daydreaming. As I worked, I could see the lights on in Dad's office across the square. He was probably there alone, trying to handle everything himself, like he used to do back in the early days. Part of me felt sorry for him, but a bigger part of me felt grateful. If he hadn't pushed me out, I never would have discovered what I was capable of on my own. I'd spent so many years trying to fit into his vision of what Sullivan and Associates should be that I'd never stopped to think about what I wanted to build. Around 9 o'clock, I packed up my things and turned off the lights. Walking down Main Street to my car, I passed the old Sullivan and Associates office. Dad's truck was still parked outside, the same faded blue Ford he'd been driving for 10 years. I paused for a moment, looking up at the windows where I'd spent so many hours of my life. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel hurt or betrayed or disappointed. I felt something I'd never expected to feel about the whole situation. Thankful. Because sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being forced to stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to succeed. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually needed. I got in my car and drove home to my little house on Elm Street, already planning what I'd accomplish tomorrow. There was work to do, clients to serve, a business to grow. And for the first time in my life, I was building something that would rise or fall entirely on my own merit. That felt better than any inheritance ever could have.